Okay, this is another video that I'm not quite sure how it's going to go, but I kind of wanted to share a bit from a new video that I just discovered. It's been on YouTube for a while by Richard Carrier. I was recommending Richard Carrier to somebody on my channel named GeorgeOr1998 who wanted to know, who is basically trying to figure out the whole does Christianity come from pagan myth or pagan religions? Gosh, this camera is just driving me crazy. Hello! Anyway, so I recommended Richard Carrier to GeorgeOr1998, hoping that this person will go check him out because, in my opinion, he is he comes across as being objective. He looks at what is true versus what is false in all the different opinions, and to me that's a sign of somebody who really just wants to know the truth. The video I recommended to GeorgeOr1998 is Richard Carrier's Why I Think Jesus Didn't Exist. A historian explains the evidence that changed his mind. It's an excellent video. It also talks about the pagan the similarities that pagan beliefs had back in the time or just before the time of Jesus's alleged whatever. And he does a very good job of explaining, you know, he picks apart the various theories or whatever. And cat's back here. And he's trying to uncover the truth, or the closest thing he can to the truth, and I think that's why I recommend Richard Carrier to anybody who really just wants to know what's true historically, what makes sense historically. And the one that I came across, he mentions it in this video that I haven't seen yet, is called Why the Gospels Are Myth, a lecture by Richard Carrier. And I kind of want to share part of it. I haven't watched the whole thing. I've just come across the part where he starts talking about the Gospels versus other. The first part of this video has more to do with what is a myth exactly, and he explains what a myth is. But here, around 39 minutes into this video, he starts talking about what about the Gospel makes it a myth, and it's interesting. And I wanted to share it as I listen. I'm not sure which would be less boring, me videotaping my computer screen with showing Richard Carrier and probably a reflection of me in the background, or me watching the video. I'm probably not going to show very much of it, but I figured I'd go with me watching the video because at least then you're not getting reflections of me with the camera in the background. So now all my animals decide to make a big... Okay, I have to find where he starts talking about the Gospels. So this is from Why the Gospels Are Myth, a lecture by Dr. Richard Carrier.
And so you wouldn't come in, almost all of them are bullshit, that they're powerful and win. In legend and
okay, so you're going to watch me listen to this.
Capturing Roman values,
but listen to him.
Change the story. So you wouldn't come in here like, you know, a Virgil apologist and say, well, the story's got to be true. It looks totally different from the Homer story. There's no relationship whatsoever. It's all the differences. No, you're missing the point. The differences are the point. So that's how myth works. Okay, now let's get back to the context we're talking about, Christian Gospels. The Gospels are faith literature. This is obvious. They're not objective histories, you know, dispassionate histories written by neutral observers. They're faith literature. They're designed for members of a faith group to celebrate and promote their values. Now, when we look at faith literature as a context, almost all of it is bullshit. I mean, this is a fact. We know that there were some 40 Gospels, 40, and
40.
Not just the 4 that are in the New Testament. We don't have most of these. We know of them only by name and description, most of them. Some of them we have fragments of. But 40 Gospels, and I'm pretty sure pretty much every Christian you talk to will agree almost all of them are bullshit, that they're myth. Well, if all of the others are myth, why are we making a special exception for the canonical Gospels? Just because the ones their church chose to revere doesn't mean that those are the reliable ones. There are also some 6 other Acts, not just the Acts in the New Testament. There's a bunch of others, also mythical, completely made up. There are at least 30 forged epistles. These are letters written by members of the church, disciples and later leaders, they were completely fake. They're written in someone else's name, often decades or centuries after the fact. And to give you an example of this, we have a find in Nag Hammadi. Nag Hammadi is this Egyptian place where there were these heretics, Christian heretics, and the Orthodox Christian group was going to come and wipe them out. So they, just before this happened, they took all of their library and stuffed it in a pot and buried it in the desert. And we found it in the 20th century. And we found a bunch of stuff in it. And it's interesting because they clearly just swept the desk and just stuffed the pot without thinking of what they were doing. Because we can actually catch them in the act of making up a story. And this is the example of Eugnostos and the Sophia of Jesus Christ. There are these two texts. There's the Eugnostos text, which is this letter written by this guy named Eugnostos, where he gives all this wisdom. And then there's this other text called the Sophia of Jesus Christ, in which there's this whole narrative where the disciples are talking to Jesus and interacting with him. And wouldn't you know, it actually has the exact same lines from Eugnostos, except now, instead of Eugnostos saying them, it's Jesus saying them. And we actually have one of them that's half done. So they're in the process of creating this fake gospel by taking Eugnostos' words, putting them into Jesus' mouth, and inventing a narrative to put it into. So we actually have an example of this happening in real time. And that's probably how most gospels got made. And then there's lots of other, we look at Jewish literature in general, you've got to realize that gospels come from a Jewish sect, ultimately. And we have Exodus, 1 and 2 Kings, Daniel, Esther, the Maccabean literature, there's several of those. Tobit, Joseph and Asenath is a famous story that was written down. Other testaments and lives of the patriarchs, way beyond what's in the Bible. All of it is made up, all of it is mythical. It's very, very, very hard to find anything that's reliably historical among faith literature, among Jewish literature, or Christian literature, or even pagan literature. Now, I could talk a lot more about what the Gospels don't have in them that would normally indicate that they were histories rather than myths. But if you want more on that, my book, Not the Impossible Faith, talks about it, particularly chapter 7, where I compare the Gospel of Luke, which is the one that tries the most to look like a history, compares that with actual histories, and it doesn't come out well. And really confirming that is The Mystery of Acts by Richard Purvo, which kind of just completely exposes the book of Acts as bullshit with capital letters all the way across. And that's a fascinating short little book. I highly recommend it. But let's talk about those markers of myth I was mentioning earlier. Gospel improbabilities. They're filled with improbabilities. One of them is the one most obvious, I don't know why it misses most people, is that Jesus walks up, this complete stranger, walks up to these fishermen and says, hey, follow me. We're going to go on a ministry and stuff. And say, yeah, they drop their nets and follow him. There's no persuasion, he explains, he doesn't impress them. There's no period of them being admiring his teachings and then coming to him. No, they just immediately drop everything, just follow and become his permanent disciples immediately from then on. That doesn't happen in reality. That's a historical improbability. That's myth. That's how you write myths. And then the disciples, like I say, are dumber than a sack of hammers. This is true. For example, they engage in the one miraculous feeding where Jesus miraculously feeds thousands of people. And then he does it again, and they, with the same situation, they go, well, how are we going to feed these people? And then they're completely amazed that he could miraculously feed them all. As if they didn't know about the previous event. And there's lots of other things they do that are bumbling and stupid. Real people don't behave that way. And their inability to understand his teachings consistently throughout the Gospels makes no sense, because you could realize they're walking around with this guy all the time, like 4 or 5 hour conversation with him, and they'd get everything nailed. There wouldn't be a problem. They wouldn't be still not understanding anything he said after weeks of traveling with the guy. So this is myth. This is not history. The idea that the Jews needed Judas to identify Jesus makes no sense. There's no plausibility, no historical plausibility in the whole Judas betrayal story. The Jews hold an illegal trial, according to their own laws, and execution on a high holy day, which is stupid because they even say, in the Gospel say, that it's going to start a riot. But they did it anyway, which makes no sense. What they would do is they would just capture him, put him in jail, and wait till the holiday left and all the pilgrims left town. And then you'd execute him, right? That's how people, or they'd have him assassinated, like we know several other examples. They just kill him in the streets and it'd be done with. That's how history really proceeds. But no, that would ruin the great story the Gospels want to tell, so they have to have the Jews engage in illegal and stupid activities. And then, of course, Jesus flies through the air with the devil. He's fed by angels and magical animals. Classic myth. The nativity stories, the miracle tales, the horde of undead. Matthew has all of the old saints rise from their graves and walk into the city and are seen by many people in Jerusalem. This is myth. This is a historical improbability. This is what we're talking about. It's littered with the Gospels are full of these. But to give you some classic examples I'm going to talk more about later, Jesus withers a fig tree for not bearing figs. I mean, he magically curses it, and it dies within a day. Even though it was not the season for figs. The gospel says that. Even though it was not the season for figs, it wasn't bearing figs. Jesus got mad, cursed it, withered it. You shall never bear figs again. Now, of course, obviously people can't magically wither fig trees. You know, this isn't Harry Potter. But, so that in itself is obvious. But even the behavior, someone who would curse a fig tree for not bearing figs, even though it's not time to bear figs, that in itself is a historical probability. It's a paradox. It's the sort of thing that must mean something. We should look more closely at what the meaning of it is. There's a famous thing where Jesus clears the temple square. He drives out all the sellers from the temple. Little historical context. The temple square that he cleared was over 12 acres in size. It was filled with hundreds of people, and there was an armed battalion on station specifically to prevent exactly that kind of action. So there's absolutely no historical plausibility to this story at all, so much so that Jesus historians who want to preserve the story, like Bruce Chilton, for example, will make up the idea that, Jesus must have come in with an armed force. Of course, that's not what the Gospel says. And that's kind of like trying to make the evidence fit the facts. But no, in reality, the story is mythical. This is a myth. This is not something that happened. And then, of course, the Jews know to guard the tomb in Matthew, but not in Mark, Luke, or John. Even though in the guard story, the guards are paralyzed by a flying monster from outer space. How do you leave that story out? I mean, that's like the greatest story ever. Yet obviously mythical. Another example, which you may have heard before, is the Rank-Raglan mythotype, or the Rank-Raglan hero score. There's a whole bunch of ancient heroes who fit this profile. It's about 22 attributes. And certain heroes meet several of these attributes. Certain historical persons do as well. They got myths written about them. But it's interesting, when they do match the profile, they usually match it through myth-making rather than actual historical facts. But more importantly, I'm not going to read through the whole list. More importantly, every single one of them, every single person we know who meets more than half of the 22 elements, so more than half of the 22, every single one of them is fictional. I mean, or at least we have no reason to believe any of these guys are historical, and this is the list of the ones we know. And Jesus scores 20. He's one of the highest scoring members of this class of heroes. He scores 20 if you count all the Gospels, especially Matthew. Matthew is the one that really makes Jesus into a Rank-Raglan hero. But even if you count Mark alone, he said it's just the first Gospel, the Gospel of Mark, he still rates 14, which is above half, and so he's well within the mythical sphere. Now, if all 15 of the people we know, 14 if you don't biasly count Jesus, if all 15 of them are mythical, why are we making exception for Jesus? We should immediately be curious about that. But even regardless of whether you think Jesus existed or not, the fact that Jesus scores so high on the Rank-Raglan hero score tells you, and he scores this way only through the Gospels, tells you that the Gospels are myth. The Gospels are taking this character and mythifying him, making him fit this mythotype. Now there's another mythotype called the Ascension mythotype that fit a lot of other heroes. And this has been demonstrated recently by Richard Miller in this article that I'm mentioning here. And unfortunately, I can't cite all of the scholars that all of this stuff comes from, but very little of this is my own original research. This is stuff that other scholars have published, but it's scattered everywhere. What I've done is I've gathered it all together. So occasionally, I'll throw the kudos to whoever found this first. And the Ascension mythotype are 20 attributes regarding these heroes that have these attributes. The hero is a son of a god. His death is accompanied by prodigies, and the land is covered in darkness. His corpse goes missing. He receives a new immortal body. The new body is occasionally radiant. He meets a follower on a road from a city. He gives a speech from a high place. In that speech, he delivers a message about his resurrection or translation to heaven. He gives a great commission to future followers. He ascends to heaven. He's taken up into a cloud. There's an explicit role for eyewitnesses. Eyewitnesses are named and mentioned. The eyewitnesses are frightened by either his appearance or his disappearance after his death. Some of them flee. There's a reference to dubious alternative accounts. If those of you who are familiar with the Gospel of Matthew, you will remember there's the dubious account that the Jews were spreading, the lie that the body was stolen, right? So that this is actually a common feature of these Ascension mythotypes, that there's references to a dubious alternative account of what happened. It occurs outside of a central city. The followers are initially in sorrow, but the resurrection story they receive leads to belief, homage, and rejoicing, and the hero is subsequently deified and cult is paid to him. Now this fits Jesus, but it also fits Romulus, the national founder of Rome, and several other heroes of the time, and Richard Miller talks about that. Another one is the dying and rising God myth theme more broadly, or even more broadly than that specific one. Romulus, again, state God. His death and resurrection was celebrated in annual passion plays. So this is a very well-known resurrected God, and he was central to Roman society and state at the time. Osiris is one, Egyptian god. Those baptized into his death and resurrection are saved in the afterlife. Sounds familiar, right? Zalmoxis is a Thracian god. His death and resurrection also assures followers of eternal life. And there are several others in this category. These aren't the only ones. These are just the ones that we can prove that these stories pre-exist Christianity. And I talk about them and more in Not the Impossible Faith. But I have to clarify that there's sometimes this type is misrepresented on the internet. For example, Mithra is sometimes put on this list of a dying and rising god. He's not. We have no evidence that Mithra was a dying and rising god. And various other things like that he was born on December 25th and things like that.
I have to say I was guilty for a long time of thinking Mithra was a dying and rising god. When you're a new atheist or you're a Christian and you're trying to find out what is really true, it's really hard to know when you're first delving into this topic. You know what the agendas are of the authors, or who is somebody that is respected and really knows their stuff versus not. I remember when I watched Zeitgeist and I was all very into that, and then I found out that was an embarrassment to atheism, more or less. But the whole anyway. So yeah, I am learned to not attach myself to any belief until I really know whether or not, and I was attached to the whole idea of Mithra for a very long time, being a dying and rising god, and anyway, so it's good to have clarification.
That could be debatable, but more importantly, even Jesus wasn't born on December 25th until much later. So we want to talk about the origins of Christianity. We have to talk about how Jesus was originally, not all the stuff that was tacked onto him later. But what all these gods do have in common, Mithra included, is that they are all savior gods, personal savior gods. They're all the son of God, and there's a few occasions of daughters of God who get this honor. They all undergo a passion. It's the same word in Greek that describes their struggle or suffering. You could call it a passion play or a passion story. They all do. They all obtain victory over death by one manner or another, which they share with their followers, and that's how they become a savior. Whatever great struggle they underwent gives them power over death. And they all have stories about them set in human history on earth, yet none of them ever actually existed. So to see that Jesus is so quickly and rapidly fitted to this type in the Gospels is a giveaway. Also, there's tons of emulation of Homer and the Septuagint. The Septuagint is the Greek translation, the ancient Greek translation of the Old Testament and other related texts. The Gospels emulate this. The Gospels authors were actually trying to create literally their own New Testament to replace the Old Testament. They wanted to get rid of the old one, get the best stories from it, and change them up, put Jesus in them, and then that would be their new Bible. That was their objective. And these books here that I have listed are the best ones to look at to see examples of the things I'm about to talk about. I won't be talking about Homeric borrowing, but I will talk about the Septuagint borrowing. So let's get to another weird thing. This gets more esoteric. This is more into literary theory. Mythic structure. I call it the original Lord of the Rings. Because the Gospels...
Okay, I'm ending it at 50 minutes 39, so when about 10 minutes of this lecture. If anybody wants to watch the whole lecture, they can find this video, Why the Gospels Are Myth, a lecture by Dr. Richard Carrier. But staring at me while I watch this video has to get boring pretty quickly. I just think that it's a tricky field to navigate when you're first trying to find out I don't want to say anybody's names, but I bought several books by somebody that I thought was a respected historian, and believed everything that I read that she said. And then I found out that maybe she's not so respected. So when I tell somebody, well, you need to do your own research, it's not because I'm mean. It's because maybe they can get to the maybe they won't be taking the long way around trying to find somebody who really is an objective researcher. I think Richard Carrier is. I steer away from any religious historian, because they have an agenda. They want to prove that the Bible is true. So they're going to have an agenda. Anything that they find is going to be to support this belief, which I don't think is accurate. And I also think that there are going to be atheists that are guilty of the same thing, that are guilty of presenting their information in such a way as to further their agenda, which, it's still, in my opinion, it's just as bad. You want the truth. You don't want somebody twisting it around to make it fit something that they want you to believe. So I'm sorry, I kind of stay away from, well, I'm a lot more aware now that there are atheists that do this too. I feel strongly from watching several of Richard Carrier's videos or his lectures, and I have a couple of his books. Not the Impossible Faith is one of them. And I think he knows his stuff. I think he's objective. I think he tries to find the little grains of truth in all the different speculations and theories that people have. And I think he's sincerely trying to get to the real history behind these different things. So I highly recommend him. I recommend his videos. I think if somebody is truly, and I have to give George Orr 1998 a lot of credit, because I'm pretty sure this is a Christian, and I didn't think they really wanted an answer from me when they said, can you provide your proof that I didn't get that they really wanted me to, they just wanted me to put something down so they could attack it. That's what I thought. Turns out I was wrong, and this person actually is trying to find out, is trying to come to the bottom of it themselves. So I have to give this person a lot of credit. I think when you're a Christian, especially as you get older, it's harder and harder and harder to be willing to even entertain the thought that you could be wrong and that you spent a whole chunk of your life believing and thinking and promoting something that wasn't true. It's hard to admit you're wrong anyway, but when you put a lot of time, and I have to give credit to pastors that have made it their livelihoods, and then they come out and courageously say that they can't believe it anymore. It's not easy to deconvert. It's not easy to even pursue a different course of well, wait, is this, like George Orr 1998, they're questioning, okay, I keep hearing this thing about how Christianity is a regurgitation of pagan religions or pagan beliefs. Well, I want to know if that's true. This person isn't just, oh, that's bullshit. I know that, I just know my religion is real. This person isn't doing this. This person, when I couldn't provide the answer they wanted, they're going in pursuit of it themselves. And I give George Orr 1998 a great deal of credit for doing that. That's exactly what I did. It is a dangerous path to follow, because when I started it on it, I wasn't trying to become an atheist. It wasn't my intention. I needed to explain my beliefs to somebody else. I needed to explain away the questions and doubts that I had in my head, and I thought it would strengthen my beliefs, my faith, by going along the path of trying to understand the argument. Well, that didn't happen. In the end, by looking into other information outside of the Bible, I ended up becoming unable to believe anymore. So it's dangerous ground. Somebody who's very protective of their religion and they're holding it like a little egg that they don't want to shatter, that's somebody who doesn't want to take the risk of losing their religion. And it takes courage to put something like that you treasure, like a belief system or a personal friendship you have with somebody that you think is real, at risk. It takes courage to do that. But that's what happens when you follow the path that Georgia 1998 is doing. You are putting that at risk when you go looking for, well, if you take up watching a Richard Carrier video and watch it all the way through, you're putting your belief system at risk, because this man knows what he's talking about and he presents it very convincingly. So anyway, I don't know if anyone's going to make it to this part of my video. Watching me stare at my computer screen for 10 minutes had to be pretty boring, but I was trying to figure out which would be worse, filming the computer screen with its little, and I'm sure there's a way to copy clips from videos, but I haven't figured that out yet. So I take my camera and film the computer screen, and half the time you get my image with the camera in the background and it looks stupid. So I thought, well, which would be more stupid? Just watching me watch the computer screen and Richard Carrier, or filming the computer screen? So anyway, if you've made it this far, congratulations. Highly recommend Richard Carrier. So thanks for watching. Bye.